Okay, great. Well, firstly, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on privacy, the pandemic-proof industry, brought to you by the Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity and Data Privacy at Cleveland Marshall College of Law here at Cleveland State University. I am Julie DiBiasio. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies here at CM Law. And as I can see the participants, I've had the pleasure to speak with each and every one of you that are on. But if those that come that I haven't had the opportunity to speak with, I look forward to meeting you. So before we go into introductions and you hear from Jared and Brian, who I know you are all here for today, I briefly want to go over the agenda. So we'll start with the discussion on the state of the privacy market and why privacy is considered a pandemic-proof industry. We will then open the floor to you for a question and answer. But I do want to mention, if it's okay with Jared and Brian, I will be monitoring the question and answer box and the chat. So feel free to ask some questions throughout their presentation. And if appropriate, we will answer them live right then and there. And after that, if time permits, we'll go into the program overview. So for those of you that are interested in furthering your career in cybersecurity and data privacy, we'll go over our Master of Legal Studies program. And we will talk about the curriculum and the admissions requirements for that. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce you to our two speakers today. And first, we'll start with Professor Brian Ray. Brian created and directs the Center for Cybersecurity and Privacy Protection here at Cleveland Marshall College of Law. He also teaches in this Master of Legal Studies program and our JD program. And I can tell you, based on the wonderful feedback I get from our current students, if you do this program, you will be so happy to have Brian as one of your professors. So Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a little more information about yourself and then introduce our special guest, Jared. Brian?
Thanks, Julie. As Julie mentioned, I created this program as well as the center, and it's actually been a real labor of love. This is, as you'll hear today, a fast-growing industry with lots and lots of emerging opportunities in a range of roles. And we're really, really excited and privileged to have Jared Coseglia with us today. Jared is the founder and CEO of True Staffing Partners, which is probably the largest and certainly the one of the most prominent talent and recruiting companies in this space, as well as in the broader space of e-discovery and legal technology. And they've been doing it since 2010. I won't read the entire bio, but Coseglia has placed over 3,000 professionals in these fields and is quickly becoming globally recognized as the go-to guy for hiring managers and job seekers. And that is direct from his bio, but that is no overstatement, I can assure you. And so that's what's really exciting about having him here today, because he's really operating at the coalface of this field. He's hearing both from job seekers, so on the supply side, and then on the demand side, hiring managers and privacy professionals across the board. He's also just a heck of a lot of fun to talk with and a great speaker. So enjoy the ride. So Jared and Julie, if you'll advance to the next slide. All right, so we're going to start with talking about the state of the privacy job market, and I know you're the true expert. As I said, you're sitting here at the coalface of it. You're seeing both sides of it. Tell us what you're seeing, and in particular, in another presentation which I stole for the title of this one, you called privacy the pandemic-proof industry. So I'd like you to elaborate a bit on that and break down for us what you're seeing and how the pandemic's affected it.
Sure. Glad to be here with everybody. Thanks for having me, and a big fan of the program and Brian's, and you guys should definitely take advantage of the knowledge that they have to share. So the reason it's pandemic proof is maybe really a comparative analysis against other jobs in the legal technology industry, namely legal project management. There was a study done by lawsource.com, and this includes jobs that are lawyers and non-lawyers, but with an emphasis on support staff. So these are non-practicing jobs, some of which have JDs in them, but many of which don't. In April of 2019 to September of 2019, there were about 7,100 open positions, so 7,100 positions in project management within legal, and that includes a corpus of legal operations, e-discovery, project management, and other areas, legal IT. The same study found that between 2020 of April to September of 2020, there were 13. Yeah, 7,000 to 13. That was their research. So
wow.
When we look at, it's
a huge difference.
And, you know, we felt it, like our business felt it. You know, we had Q2 and Q3 of 2020 were some of the worst quarters in company history since like the early teens of me opening my business. And that had largely to do with people just stopped hiring, right? It was just a ceasefire for a while people figured, recalibrated what they were going to do, how they were going to adjust to the pandemic. And then Q4 of last year was one of the biggest quarters we've ever had in company history, huge surge. We'll talk a little bit about how that talent gap is being filled between full-time hires and contract hires in a second. But to answer your question, that same study I was talking about found that in 2019, that same time period, there were about 600, like 580 jobs in compliance, which is where they're compartmentalizing the privacy positions. And that same time period in 2020, that only dipped to around 450. So when you look at that comparatively, that's why I say, you know, privacy is pandemic.
Yeah.
And we experienced it, right? My organization specializes in legal technology staffing with a strong emphasis on e-discovery, data privacy, and cybersecurity. And I can tell you our e-discovery and cybersecurity businesses like shut down in Q2 and Q3 of last year, more or less.
So curious that cybersecurity didn't track with privacy.
Well, here's why, because the trajectory of privacy changed for a lot of companies when the pandemic came. I'll give you a really simple example. Say you're a company that was never required to really have to deal with HIPAA, right? You're just not a company that is, you know, having to deal with HIPAA, but now you're having employees come into the office and you're taking their temperature. Well, now you're having to be compliant with HIPAA because that temperature is medical information. That medical information is protected in a different way than your street address. And as a result, the companies have to now switch their posture as it comes to privacy and how they deal with data. And that's a small example. I mean, maybe not a small example if you're Tyson Chicken and people still have to come into that facility every single day, right? Very different.
Right.
Or, working in a field where it's technology and, they were moving towards remote work culture anyway. But that's a big reason, right? Is that all of a sudden people had to care about HIPAA. And when you care about HIPAA, you're talking about data privacy and who's the expert on staff that can handle that. And are we going to fractionally delegate that to someone on staff, or are we going to acquire talent that can handle those kinds of needs? Do we use that?
Interestingly, that we massively increased our attack surface, as I know from talking to CISOs, especially ones in ed who have no staff. But I suppose in that respect, there's also this massive increase or at least also increased understanding and recognition of the legal obligations that are coming online, right? Whereas opposed to security, it's not that it's not new stuff coming on, but we sort of know what we're doing, or we don't, but they don't think about adding staff for it in the same way as privacy.
Well, look, not only is it the legal obligations, but it's an environment with incredibly fractured legal obligations, right? You got 50 different states who all have different requirements. And until we get one ring to rule them all at a federal level, then it's going to be a job creator, right? I mean, outside counsel love this. Outside counsel at the AmLaw 200 is living rich off the fragmentation of state-by-state laws as it comes to privacy, because most companies are either internalizing these efforts to wrangle those laws, or they're turning to outside counsel to help them with that. Yes, there's some technology automation, but that doesn't help you institutionalize policies and procedures within your own organization when those laws change or are updated, and they get changed or updated so frequently that, you need somebody watching and managing that. I'll also add this. A lot of companies, as a result of the pandemic, went global in their customer outreach. And all of a sudden, you go from being a company that just does business in the US, a company that's doing business in Europe or Latin America, and now you're opening yourself for all sorts of different kinds of regulatory and compliance obligations, not to mention the fact that what's happening at the same time that all of the compliance related issues surrounding privacy are accelerating, you're also creating a culture in the United States, because there is no federal law, where it's not the government that's defining the ethical use of data. it's the corporations. And as corporations begin to say, this is what is ethical, this is how we're going to use data. I mean, just I think yesterday or 2 days ago, Google announced that they're not going to use the same algorithms and methodologies for their advertising. Game changer. I mean, just huge game changer in the privacy industry and in the ad tech industry. And if they're paving the way, others will follow. So we are now looking at privacy not only as a way that companies are staying compliant, but a way in which companies are using privacy as a means to define consumer trust and customer trust, and therefore retain and acquire more customers.
And then change the marketplace, right? So
Correct.
Apple's announcement that they're going to phase out the advertising identifier, it's going to completely restructure how that works. So you got to figure out how you're going to do it.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
It may not restructure how Twitter works, though. I mean, you've got to think of it very differently, right? The ad methodologies of these different companies is radically different. When you're on Facebook, go and look at your privacy settings and what they're actually looking at with your data. And when you go and you look at Twitter, it's very different. You know, it's very different. The kind of data they're pulling, aggregating, saving, using, selling. And until the average consumer feels confident that they can become knowledgeable, where they can wield their own privacy regulations for them personally and individually through the people that they engage with as businesses, I mean, I just think we're generations away from that, frankly.
Well, and it may be a matter of the tech's got to do it for them, right? It's because it's individualizing that responsibility is almost inevitably going to be too much. Even if I'm given, the ability to, to finally calibrate all the controls, if I have to do that on a regular basis.
I think for my grandmother, who doesn't care what kind of data that Facebook has about her or that any organization has about her, what she cares about is the convenience that is generated from the use of that data versus, say, my niece, who's 12 years old, who won't send me a text message through an iPhone. I have to use Signal if I want to text message with her because she's encrypted and it's safe.
But she probably uses TikTok.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, all these polarities and contradictions happening at an individual level. That's right. Yeah. Which makes it complicated and sticky, but a great business to be in.
Exactly. And opportunities sort of, emerging at a range of intersections between the business side, the compliance side, and others. So with that, let's talk then about the positions and what are you seeing in terms of the roles in this pandemic-proof industry?
Yeah, I mean, look, we had predicted at the top of 2020, before we knew there was going to be a pandemic, that we were going to see a huge surge in middle market hiring in the privacy community, which will include, managers, entry-level professionals, project managers, privacy analysts, and it just didn't happen. When the pandemic hit, what it forced is kind of a top-down restructuring, and we actually saw almost as many CPO searches in our portfolio in 2020 as we did in 2019, which we didn't think possible. We thought all those people were kind of settled and now we're going to build their teams, but it all restructured. So in 2020, most of the privacy jobs were still at 7 to 10 years of experience, which is not the middle of the market.
And is it your sense these are new CPO positions or people are moving around? No, this is just, we need to fill the position again because somebody's jumped.
It's a mix. So I don't want to say 50-50, but it's a mix. And I would say that in the bigger companies, it's usually a replacement for attrition. But there's a lot of startups out there that have to have these people, particularly, and this is a bullet on this slide, in healthcare tech. So you think technology company that deals with healthcare data and is maybe using, selling, distributing, aggregating healthcare data, the most private of data, in order to monetize it and provide a service. I mean, their privacy person is core to the strategic initiatives of the business. And so a lot of those companies, as they begin to balloon or get funding or go through, a Series A, begin to add higher end caliber professionals to lead that charge. But that's not to say there isn't turnover in the big companies too. There is, and that requires replacement.
And just to put a finer point on, when you say healthcare tech, you're not talking about health entities. You're talking about newer technology companies.
I'll give you an example of a company that's a healthcare tech company, like a company like Flatiron, which is an oncology research aggregator who delivers, intelligence on analysis of aggregated oncology research. They have to gather oncology data, repurpose it. They have different, modules with which they sell back to doctors, but they're also dealing with clinical trial data, patient data. That's a healthcare tech company, right? They've got a technology that's almost like a SaaS offering that is delivering some kind of information based on aggregating information surrounding, the pursuit of curing and treating cancer. Sloan Kettering Hospital may not be a healthcare tech company, right? A hospital would not be a healthcare tech company. Is there a lot of overlap between the responsibilities? Of course. But productizing things is that extra step where you go from healthcare to healthcare tech, where you're productizing it. And as a privacy professional, working with product teams, working with technology product managers, and being a resource for them to, is this compliant? What can we do? What's the cutting edge? What's the bleeding edge? How far are we willing to go in terms of the risk profile for what this publicly presents? And having that kind of strategic conversation throughout the business is what separates what I would call healthcare versus healthcare tech. It's the productization.
Okay, and so the demand still is sitting at a fair amount of, or a lot of the demand is sitting at a fair amount of experience level. What are you seeing sort of downstream in terms of, mid-tier and then in particular entry-level positions?
Yeah, so entry is the hardest to come by, and the advice to people who are entry level is you have to be willing to essentially take whatever you can get in terms of pay, be willing to do whatever it takes. I would say most of the entry level people that we're placing at this point are on contracts or contract to hire positions. And most of the entry level people we're placing at this point are doing things that are not 9 to 5, right? Like they're working on follow the sun shifts for incident response requests and remediation. They're working on rollouts of technology for enterprise-wide privacy compliance programs that maybe are happening in off hours when the business isn't up and working. They're US-based supporting global initiatives, so they're working Hong Kong hours. I mean, they're not the most desirable jobs in terms of, this is my dream job, I'm gonna go sit in this for the next 10 years. They're jobs that most employers need to get done. They need somebody who's willing to go above and beyond. They know they may not get somebody with deep experience who's willing to make those kind of compromises for the job that they have. And so they're going to train and groom somebody who's entry level. I would say most people that have success getting into those positions are people who've gone ahead and gotten their training or certification, either from an organization like yours or from the IAPP, or quite frankly, both. The more education you have, the better, and the more competitive you are. If you've got no education, the likelihood of someone taking a chance on you is pretty slim. People want to invest in, employers want to invest in people who invest in themselves. And so one of the first conversations with entry-level employees that almost all my hiring managers have is, what have you done to further your training and education? If you don't have a good answer for that question, the interview is going to be over pretty quickly. In terms of,
and that's, go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of that next tier up, like I got a little bit of experience, but not a lot. I think you're going to see a lot of jobs for that in the second, third, and fourth quarter. I mean, we work with CPOs who we placed in Q2 and 3 and 4 of last year that are coming to us with jobs where, okay, I need a number 2, or my number 2 needs a number 3. The other thing that's happening, Brian, that is part of the slide that's really worth mentioning to everybody listening is, a lot of privacy hiring managers, even though it's pandemic proof, they're still fighting for budget. They're still fighting for headcount tooth and nail. And so when they do get that budget and headcount, they're not always going to find one human being who can fulfill all the needs of what they need done in that 9 to 12 months. So what they're doing is instead saying, can I go out and get somebody for 60 hours who can help me with Latin America privacy experience? Can I go out and get somebody that can work 20 hours a week and be our follow the sun response time for DSAR requests that come in after hours? Can I go out and get somebody who is just going to help me institutionalize OneTrust as an enterprise technology? And then I won't need them anymore. Maybe then I'll convert them to a full-time employee. And instead of hiring one person who can do one of those things and I'm going to have to train them on the other 2, they're hiring 3 people in contract roles, sometimes part-time or sometimes for very truncated periods of time, to come in and be impact players. And what I'll say to people who are like, oh, like that doesn't sound good to me, I got to put bread on the table. If you go out and do that for 6 months, you're going to get a full-time job after that, right? You're going to have work experience.
And that's, what's interesting is that's actually true, I would say, for at least 70, 80% of students in both in this program and in law school. You sort of have to do that networking and hustle and define yourself and show that initiative and make yourself valuable in whatever role you're given the opportunity to start with. And that's, getting those kinds of credentials. But yeah, it's really interesting that even in a substantial growth market, it's still, everybody always wants that experience because they don't want to invest, right? They don't want to invest in that early part. I think
There's no
and it's
time.
expensive.
I mean, it's not that they don't want to, right? Because I'll be very candid with you. Part of the reason why I left a career in theater behind is because the people in e-discovery and the data privacy community in particular were so warm, so welcoming, led with trust first. And these are really appealing things if you want to be part of a professional community. But they also have really tight time deadlines for the work that they do.
And budgets.
The stakes are so high, right? We're not dealing with, you make an error and it's no big deal. You make an error and you cost the company millions and billions of dollars. So, the high stakes nature, the high time sensitivity of these, regulatory deadlines and pressures makes hiring managers have to say, if I can hire experienced talent first, I'm going to. But not all of them have the budget to do that. Not all of them are going to get the talent that they want, largely of which because they move too slowly on the interview process. Not to get too off topic, but I want to offer this because this is a really important thing for everybody to understand. 75% of the jobs we placed in 2020 were remote. And right now that trend is maintained.
Julie, let's go to the next slide real quick because this is relevant here.
Because everybody is hiring people in remote capacity now, they're able to go all over the country to look for talent. So companies that used to say, I have to have somebody in Cleveland, Ohio, are now able to say, I can have somebody anywhere. Now that does two things. One, it means they're going to see more qualified candidates for the jobs they're staffing for faster. So instead of having to go through 4 or 5 rounds of processes where 1 out of every 3 candidates is right, and we're just interviewing more people because they're local, they're now saying, I'm interviewing 4 people, I'm calling back 3, I'm hiring 1. And that's it. And they're done in like a week, maybe 2. I've never seen the market move this fast. Now, for candidates, what you have to understand is there are also more jobs available for you. You no longer have to be bound to having to find a job in Cleveland, Ohio. You can go looking at jobs all over the country because 68% of the jobs are remote based on last year. Now, that is going to recalibrate a little bit as we come out of the pandemic, but there's an opportunistic moment in time right now for both job seekers and hiring managers. And for hiring managers, my advice to you is if you don't make decisions quickly, you're toast. And if you're a candidate, if you're not expanding your outreach onto a national level and looking for people hiring remote, you're also limiting what's available to you.
Yeah, and there's obvious sort of overlap synergy between the idea of hiring, bifurcating into contract positions and then hiring remotely, right? Because you're thinking of them as part-time or temporary. And so, but again, if you can make yourself useful and show your value, then you might be asked to relocate, right? Down the line, if you can.
Well, look, if you really want to break into the business and you have an opportunity to go work for Facebook and you're based in Atlanta and 12 months from now, they say, we want you to move to San Francisco and you don't want to do it, you leave the job. I mean, I guess, but I think most people are going to pack their bags. I do.
Right. Well, and maybe you become valuable enough where you can, shop yourself around locally. Like, so you want to get in where you can get in, and you want to have those credentials. So let's move on to the next slide, Julie, real quick, and let's talk about credentials, which Jared mentioned. And so why don't you walk us through this very interesting map you've got, which I love, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, this is so if you start in the center, that center ring are all IAPP certifications, and the IAPP is really the gold standard for privacy. So if you're looking to break into the business, I would start with your CIPP US or your CIPP or your CIPM. If you're in Europe, you want to get your E, Canada, your C, APAC, your A. But I think most people are going to want to get a US, particularly because we're so bifurcated here in terms of the different laws in different states. You're going to really want to know the what, right? And that's what a CIPP is. It's the what.
And let me just stop you there, just because a lot of folks probably aren't familiar. IPP is they really are the one of the only, but certainly the major global industry body, and they've created these certifications. The US is the CIPPs are law-based, right? And the CIPM is a little bit more technical, operational, correct?
Yeah, the CIPM is going to give you the technology. You know, if you think of things in a pyramid, people, process, and technology, the technology piece is the CIPT. And I think that if you are an IT person and that's how you're going to differentiate yourself, you could start there. You could definitely start there. But at a certain point, your growth potential will be limited if you can't also talk about the what, right? Here are the laws, here's the what behind why we're doing or how we're doing it, right? A CIPM is the program management. So that's the how we're going to build a program. And if you don't really know the laws, you know, it's difficult to say that you're well-rounded enough to, you know, lead, I think.
Right. Right. And this is this on security, it was a huge time culture shift for the technologists to realize they got to understand the laws, and the lawyers still aren't that great at learning the tech, but they're getting there. And just a bit to make it relevant to this program, we have a good relationship with IPP. We're now one of the, I think, 30 schools that offer a student award for one of the students in one of the privacy courses. And we map to, in particular, it's a mix of US and CIPM in the privacy law and management course. You still got to cram, just like the bar. But it's, you know, it's one of the things that you know, we're obviously emphasizing, and we encourage students. And we're working on trying to put together low cost or maybe free, if we can manage it, sort of boot camps for students after they get privacy law and management to take one of the exams. You still have to pay for the test. But anyways, so that's, you know, that's clearly what you want, right? It's the degree is valuable in its own right, because we're giving you that in-depth, both sides, the technology and the laws, with an emphasis on the laws. But you still need these credentials. Lawyers get them. Compliance professionals get them, technologists get them. And so then let's move out to that next ring. And this is an area that we're looking at as well, thinking about how can we kind of engage with these. But why don't you tell us about those?
Yeah, so a quick step back and then I'll address that. I would just say this, the IEPP is what hiring managers consider the gold standard. So it's not just about the education, although you will get that, although there may be quite a bit of overlap between what you're getting at Cleveland Marshall and the IEPP may say, oh, there's some overlap here. But I think what you, as a talent agent, having the IEPP credential is a shortcut for a hiring manager to sign off on credibility. And that's what it does for you from a credibility standpoint at a broad level, right? On a global level, IEPP has 55,000 members and 30,000 certified professionals out there all over the globe, which, I mean, you look at, you know, other industries with maybe the exception of cybersecurity, and everything else pales in comparison. And nobody's got that kind of patronage. So it's leverage.
Right, and that's why we map to it, and we're happy. And I tell all my law students and students of this program, you want to get in this industry, you want to crack it as an entry level, get your first certification, because that demonstrates, you know, that eagerness. I mean, obviously getting a dedicated degree is helpful, but yeah, they don't. You know, we're well known in the region, but Facebook isn't going to say, oh yeah, yet, maybe in 10 years, but Facebook right now isn't going to say, oh yeah, the Cleveland Marshall, we know that tracks to the US and the
I mean,
the
they
CIPM.
might, but, you know, they might, but I think
we got one grad in the Facebook privacy office. Yeah.
I hope you take this as a high compliment, but the degree is going to make you good at your job, but the certification might get you the job, right? And that there's a difference.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and you mentioned it in passing, you want to be part of the IPP, and of course you don't have to have a cert to get part of it.
Correct.
You know, it sort of gets you in that and educates you about, because it really is incredibly valuable. They've done an excellent job, really building up the field in a sense. I mean, the field was going to come on anyways, but creating
they professionalized it.
Yeah, in a high quality, you know, professional association. Okay, and so if we get to that next.
So we go vocational here, Brian. That's what this is, right? This is putting hands on keyboards and being able to wield specific brand technology in order to execute on agendas. I think the most popular tool is OneTrust. I think their recent valuation is around $5 billion. They were the Inc. 5000's fastest growing company in America in 2020. I would expect that they're going to be the ServiceNow of digital transformation for privacy all over the Fortune 1000 and beyond. Expect enterprise implementation opportunities for IT professionals, and expect, you know, people who are project managers. They're not calling them that right now, but that's really what they're going to be. People
Right.
who are project managers in privacy needing to wield that technology. I'll make an analogy to e-discovery. If you've got a relativity certified admin and you want to break into e-discovery, that's how you break in. You get your ACEDs and you get your relativity admin cert. And now there's going to be 80% of the market is available to you in terms of job opportunity as a professional in the space. Similar in privacy, I think if you've got the IEPP certs and a OneTrust certification, there are going to be a tremendous amount of opportunities out there for you to leverage those.
Yeah. And sorry, just to add on to that, what's really interesting when you think about this, so the degree is going to give you all that broad knowledge. It's going to allow you, it's going to be useful throughout your career. The certs are going to then, give you that gold seal of approval. It's still knowledge based. Whereas what these are, for those of you who aren't in legal technology field, it's like getting a Microsoft cert, being able to do a certain kind of very specific technical, use a platform basically. Right. And it's interesting, these privacy platforms are relatively new, but quickly OneTrust has come to dominate. TrustArc is probably the second. And it's just, you have to use technology to manage these obligations in any meaningfully efficient way. I mean, you still need to use the people part, and you've got to have the processes to make it real, but just to kind of map the data and figure out what you're, just keep track of what you're doing. And what's nice about them, and we're playing around, we don't yet have anything formal, but we're playing around with trying to think about offering, obviously we're encouraging students to get this and we're introducing them generally to the technology, but we're trying to think about, I did this in a discovery course years ago where we used, we actually exposed students to a particular tool and got them practice on it. They didn't get the cert right away, but it's useful to see it because it also concretizes the, some of the abstractions of the laws. Like, this is how you really, really do it, right? You can use this tool and it's going to data map and do all these things. So even if, even if you're not, don't feel like you need that specific cert, it's useful to understand it. Because even if you're sitting at a manager level or supervisor level, you got to know how that tech's working to know that it's really doing what you want it to do.
Or you don't, right? Or you don't, and you have to go hire somebody who does, who can take your translation and put it into practice with the technology. And that's where the next gen of privacy talent is probably going to find their point of entry, right? They're not going to find their point of entry being the strategic leader, of an organization with no practical experience. They're going to say, hey, I need to implement these processes. Let's go. You know how to use OneTrust. Yeah. And all the OneTrust certs are free, online, free.
Yeah. And so, right. You just have to give me your data. But yeah, it's not much. They're not tracking you. And then this, I'm less familiar. The outer ring here. What are we looking at here?
We're looking at nuance. So we're looking at things that are vertical specific, or things that are moving into more risk-oriented kind of opportunities. But really, I think the most popular on the third ring are going to be those healthcare ones, because healthcare is so specific and HIPAA so specific, and that community of professionals is, I would say, of all my hiring managers, the most reluctant to hire people that don't have that set of experiences, and not the certs per se, but just being in a HIPAA regulated environment. I think it's harder to get a job at a HIPAA regulated institution without that experience, or at least that education. So I would say those are probably the most notable. I will say that if you are learning privacy more from the security perspective, maybe the ESRP for kids mobile is good, because I think those come up, kind of in the same way that child pornography comes up in cases where that's not what they're looking for. Right? I mean, when I first got into e-discovery, I would hear this all the time. Like, we did a forensic collection on some guy's laptop for tax fraud, and we found child pornography. And then they're required to, report that to the authorities. The same can kind of be true of privacy with certain laws and regulations. And like, there are certain things where people are doing things with data that's related to, children in particular. It may not be a violation of law, but it may be a violation of ethics. I mean, you get into all these kinds of issues, and there is some technology that addresses those things.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that. And to turn back to the healthcare, it's one of the strengths of Cleveland Marshall as well. We've got a whole different set of programs in healthcare, but we integrate. So one of the in-depth single course that goes into one single regulatory regime is HIPAA and privacy. In part because even though it's one vertical, it's that and financial services, it has the most extensive and in-depth set of regulatory obligations. So if you can understand HIPAA, you can understand almost everything else. You got to learn the details.
And here's the good thing about HIPAA. It hasn't changed since 1996. And it probably should, but it hasn't, I mean, it's essentially the same law for the last, several.
Well, and in some ways HIPAA sort of led, other regimes as well, right? In its depth and the kind of layers that it puts on everything, from general principles to controls and risk frameworks and things.
Well, I mean, look, not to get too off topic, but maybe your students will find this interesting. I mean, to make it even bigger, HIPAA is really a civil rights act. I mean, if you really look at the history of HIPAA, was really created in order to protect Black Americans from being taken advantage of in the system, and making sure they could get equal healthcare rights, which they weren't. And so when you think about privacy, actually stems from HIPAA, was born from HIPAA, was really born from like a civil rights initiative. It puts into perspective that privacy is much more than a regulatory and compliant thing. This is human rights we're talking about here. So, what I love about the industry, one of the things, there are many things, but what I love about it is it's attracting people where the core values of doing ethically right and good are part of what attracts people to the profession, right? And I don't know that that's the same of security. I mean, I work with a lot of security professionals, and look, there are ethical hackers who have that kind of moral compass, but there are also a lot of people that got into that business not for that reason. They got into it for the other reason, because they like to break the rules, they like to break the laws, they like to break the technology, and there was a venue for them to do that fed that energy. Privacy people are not like that. It's very different.
I mean, the white hat hacker is probably the biggest breaker, right? The protectors are sort of more sit almost on a kind of law enforcement mentality in a sense, right? A lot of security people come from physical security. That's an interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that difference, but you're right.
I'll offer you a metaphor, Brian, that you'll love. You can use this. Security is the bars on the window, but privacy is the shades. And at the end of the day,
I like it.
At the end of the day, bars are bars, and you've either got good bars or bars that are going to break, but there are so many different kinds of shades. There's so many shades of gray. And so with privacy, I think what you've got is a truer intersection of legal and technology, where the company you're at is going to define the way that you handle privacy. Whereas security, that may be true of security too, but there are clear lines in the sand with security, both legally and technically, that determine competence and determine posture. And with privacy, it's so much stickier and muddier and messier. And for me, that's exciting.
Yeah, and I'll extend the metaphor. It's a great metaphor, because the thing about privacy, and this is true of HIPAA, right? HIPAA's initial mandate was as much about access and as it was about, and so the shade is great because you need to let some light in, right?
Correct.
And that's the challenge. Whereas the bars, well, I mean, it's sort of the business split, but but you got to use the window for security. But anyways, great, excellent. I love the metaphor. All right, so we do want to save a little bit of time in case there are questions, and we're going to go through the program in a little bit more concretely, and we like to wrap up in under an hour so we don't keep people too long. Can I just ask you, Jared, real quick, for your closing thoughts? What would you say to someone who's thinking about this field?
This field is going to be huge. It's going to employ hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that don't exist in the space yet. So to get in now really is still opportunistically to get in at the ground floor. I encourage people to go in full throttle. I could have sat and had a very successful e-discovery business. My organization is the leading organization for e-discovery staffing. We still do tons of it, but there's something about privacy that affects me at the core, both as a legal professional, but also as a human. And I think to participate in the community that's shaping the laws and best practices for how we deal with our digital avatar footprint will help define the future of the human race. I really do.
Yeah, no, it is. There's a depth to e-discovery is interesting in its own right, but it's sort of self-limiting. It's because it's an adjunct to litigation. whereas privacy spreads out in all sorts of directions. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the surveillance capability, it's an area that I do a lot of research in. It's just terrifying. Just terrifying. There's a New York Times article, I think it was New York Times, no, Motherboard came out with, they're a great investigative journalist, and a little edgy. But they just came out with a report where this network of national cameras by this company, they're not even Ring, as big as Ring, they've been selling automated license plate reader enabled video. So it's not the video itself, although it is capturing some video. They're reading the license plates and they're selling it to private communities, and they've networked it nationally. So anyways, it's just one of the many ways in which this goes off and affects sort of exactly what we want to be as a society, and how much control we want government and private entities to have. It's a fascinating field. Well, thank you. Let me now ask if any of the attendees right now have questions so far for Jared. We'll if we have time at the end, we'll circle back as well. But on the substance or anything about the what we've covered so far, and we're gonna give a quick overview of the program and tell you how you can apply or get more information if you're interested in a second. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any now, but please pop them in the chat as we go along if you've got some, and we'll respond to them. Julie's monitoring, and I've got it up as well. So Julie, there we go. You anticipated where I was going. This is the core curriculum that we've mapped out for the sort of the first iteration of the program. We're almost done. We're in the process of building the last two courses you see in semester 5. The sequence will vary depending on when you enter the program a bit. But the basic structure, as you'll see here, is we are giving you a thorough grounding on sort of both sides of the house, the legal compliance and a little bit of the business, as well as the technical. And we start you out and then move you along 2 tracks to intermingle those. So in first semester, we give you Introduction to American Law, which is the course that I created and teach, which is essentially boot camp for law. We go through most of the major topics you would cover in first year of law school, as well as some advanced topics that are relevant to data security and privacy, just to get you that nice grounding in understanding the legal concepts and to prepare you for the upper level legal courses. And then Cybersecurity 1 is a technical course. All of these courses, except Introduction to American Law, are courses that we teach to our Juris Doctor students, to students who are becoming lawyers as well, and a certificate we offer there. But we've adapted them for this program so that they're asynchronous and designed to be accessible to non-lawyers. But one of the things we do to you, as well as to the lawyers or proto-lawyers, is we just throw you in the deep end on the technical side. And Cybersecurity 1 is basically gets you up to speed on technology. You do not have to have a technology background to take it, but we do sort of push you quite a bit. You even start to play around with some ethical hacker tools. Cleveland State lets us sort of send you loose with some guidance, trying to do a little modest pen testing on some of our systems. And actually, we're working with Ohio's new cyber range to try to move that course to use that capacity. And then the second special, legal writing, goes a little more in depth. We call it legal writing because that was the name of it, but really it's legal writing research. It's teaching you more concretely and specifically how to use legal materials, a little bit how to produce them. And one of the key things, if you're not a lawyer and you're dealing with compliance, and especially if you're a technologist dealing with the lawyers, it's really helpful to speak their language. And we teach the lawyers the technical side so they can speak their language. And both Intro to American Law, but legal writing in particular, is about learning that language in depth and being able to communicate and digest on your own legal materials. So as Jared mentioned, you really got to know the law, even if you're not the lawyer, and the laws are changing all the time. So, getting those 2 courses is really going to give you the toolkit you need to just, a new law comes on, you're going to be able to read it and understand it and understand what different kinds of authorities you can go look for to get more authoritative analyses and background on those laws. And then Cybersecurity 2 goes back over most of the same topics of Cybersecurity 1, but now in the context of an applied project that's HIPAA based. You've got to develop a set of controls for a business associate, which is a business that services a health entity and has the same obligations. And then, as we mentioned before, the upper level, we've got HIPAA and privacy that goes in depth into one of the major regulatory regimes. Corporate compliance 1 and 2 are our core compliance. They go heavily into security and privacy, but also give you that broader picture and understanding about compliance writ large and how you create compliance programs. What are the different dimensions to it, which is, a really important part of any privacy and security program. And then privacy law and management is the upper level core privacy course that I'm actually co-creating it, and we're teaching it with the former chief privacy officer of Nationwide Insurance. And it goes in depth on how we sort of survey the major privacy laws, but the idea is, how do you create a program that can comply with multiple, sometimes conflicting obligations? What are the components of it? And it gives you that, that in-depth understanding of, okay, this is how I deal with it, even when the law changes or when we go into a new business segment where I'm now suddenly, as Jared mentioned, dealing with Europe or dealing with California. Of course, everybody deals with California, but that's that course, and that's sort of the core capstone on the legal side. And then in semester 5, the cybersecurity technical capstone. This is where we are definitely going to use the cyber range. We're in the process of building that. Gets into some more technical depth using the tools. Really maps generally to what's called the Certified Ethical Hacker certification, which is a certification that sits on the security side. And then cyber law, we're really fortunate to have a professor at the United States Air Force Academy who's a former, what I call cyber spook. He was in naval intelligence on the cybersecurity side. And so this is an upper level course that gets at that kind of national security, international law dimension, which even if you're not dealing directly with it, there are a lot of interesting aspects that you've got to kind of understand, because they sort of filter down things like hackback and other concepts. But there's almost always an international dimension to cybersecurity, because the major threat actors are coming from other countries, and so figuring out what your response options are, it's really important to understand that legal environment, even if you're not going to be an international lawyer or working in the military. So that's it. And as we grow the program, we're going to have other electives that we'll offer to allow students who want to go more on the technical side or more on the legal side. But this is the sort of core of it. And we're happy to answer any questions either now or later. But before we turn to questions, I'm going to turn it back to Julie and let Julie then let people know real quickly what to do if you're interested in the program.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Jared. That was such a fascinating and engaging conversation. So I'm going to breeze through this so we can get to your questions that you have for Jared and Brian, because the fact that you have both of them here ready to answer your questions, I really think you should take advantage of that. So I want everyone to know we are accepting applications right now for our summer cohort. The summer cohort starts May 3rd. The application deadline is April 26th. Listed here are our application materials, but what I tell everyone to do, and the best thing to do, is to contact me. Let's have a conversation. We can figure out together if this program is right for you. I can go in detail about the application and how to apply. And that's what I love to do. So please do not hesitate to contact me. My information is all here. You signed up for this webinar, so you've already received emails from me. You can simply reply to that and we can set up a time to talk. So now I do want to toss it back over to Brian and Jared and all of you to ask any questions that you have, or Brian and Jared, if there's more that you would like to share about this industry, please do so.
Thanks, Shirley. And I'll just add, in terms of questions, please talk to us. One of the things that we do is we've had quite a bit of demand from folks who are lawyers, have the JD, and we can work with you to waive those basic law courses so you can get in on that. And also we've had several cybersecurity professionals for whom Cyber 1 might not be relevant in some Cyber 2. So we're able to adjust the program and get you started at the level that's appropriate to you. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we actually like to learn about the backgrounds of students who are interested and make sure it's a good fit. And so with that, I don't see any questions right now, but we're gonna share the recording back out with the broader audience, and feel free to send questions our way. And I just want to thank Jared again. This is great, and we'll try to bring you back post-pandemic, and let's see if there's such a thing as the post-pandemic proof
Yeah, I was
industry.
going to say, let's see if that even exists. I'm more of the mind that this never ends, and quite frankly, I'll be really honest, I think it's a good thing, because it has hyper accelerated things that needed to happen anyway. For example, employers creating and developing flexible hybrid models for working at home and working in the office. The 9 to 5, 5 days a week is a dying reality, and those that fight against that are going to be struggled. I do want to say one last thing, Brian, before we leave, which is our scholarship program. We've been in business for 11 years. Very important to me to give back to the community, because the community has given me quite a bit. And we do a scholarship program. We give away $250,000 in training and education every year. The IAPP is part of that scholarship program. They're giving away a CIPP US and a CIPM training and certification exam for free to one lucky winner. And everybody that's on this call is very likely a strong candidate for that scholarship. So please apply. Today's the last day to apply, so the timing is somewhat kismet. You can go to truestaffingpartners.com, trustaffingpartners.com, click on the scholarship. It's one of our homepage banners. It'll take you right to the application. The application is 100% merit-based. So it's all about the paragraph you're going to write about why you deserve or want this training and education. And look, it's not just privacy. We've got just about every technology in e-discovery participating, including relativity, iConnect, EDT, brain space, you name it. I mean, it goes on and on. Nuix, portfolio of technologies from all sorts of different companies. There's a dozen of them. And I would encourage everybody to apply for those, as well as, even if you're not interested in privacy, being able to wield some of those technologies. ACEDS is also part of our program if you're interested in that certification. So please, I say it so much, and I'll give you guys a little clue. You'd be amazed how few people apply for this scholarship program. You would be amazed. You think like, oh, this is so wonderful, you do this, you must get thousands of applicants, but we don't. We don't. It's discouraging how few applicants we actually get and how much we put into marketing and advertising this program. So please apply. We want to better the community, and we want to better people's lives. And the way that you're going to do that, whether it's this industry or any other, is education, always.
Yeah, and I know I've sent at least a handful of students your way, and we should talk more. We'll be part of your outreach. We'll get a link up on our program website, and make sure that we get our career guidance folks linked to it. Although I think I sent it to them, but yeah, that's wonderful. And those are fantastic. We talked about it. The cert is something you definitely need, or is very, very helpful to get that first job. And also just another way to, advance your skill set. Even lawyers with a lot of experience come back and get those certifications.
I'll close with this,
really
Brian.
helpful.
The #1 question from hiring managers in 2020, the #1 question asked on interviews: what have you been doing with your pandemic downtime to improve yourself professionally? The #1 question. And if you didn't have a good answer, the interview's over, man. It's over. Employers invest in people who invest in themselves.
Yep. And that's what we're here for. So thanks again, Jared. It was really wonderful chatting. And I put the True Staffing Partners in the chat, and remember to do it to the attendees this time instead of just us. So we'll talk again soon. And hopefully, even though we won't ever be done with the pandemic, maybe I'll see you live at an event sometime soon.
I hope so, man. I'd love that. Let's hug it out.
Yeah.
Safely.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.